Does America have a heavy tank during World War II? According to the 1944 Dictionary of U.S. Army terms, heavy tanks are defined as tanks of over 40 tons in weight, as well as carrying the greatest armament and armor. Despite this definition, the United States does not field a true heavy tank. But during World War II, the U.S. Army did get close. In 1944, the Sherman medium tank was once again being modified and creating a vehicle that neared the heavy tank role but did not necessarily cross into it. But why isn't this vehicle considered a heavy tank? To answer that, we need to dive into a story of necessity and battlefield innovation. In early 1942, the need for a heavily armored tank was recognized during discussions between British and American tank committees. The prototype assault tank, the T-14, was created. The project was ultimately canceled. By 1943, U.S. forces faced mounting losses against German armored units. Desperate tankers began welding makeshift armor onto their Shermans. In response, the U.S. Army sought a quick solution, opting to adapt to the M4 Sherman rather than designing a new tank. In late 1943, the U.S. Ordnance Department tested an M4A3 Sherman with additional armor, increasing its weight to 41.8 tons. Remarkably, it performed well in its 500-mile trials. By early 1944, an urgent request for 250 heavily armored tanks for operations in Europe, including breaching the Siegfried Line, accelerated the project. By March of 1944, the modified tank was officially designated the medium tank M4A3E2. Nicknamed the Jumbo post-war, it served as a stopgap that combined battlefield necessity with innovation. An order for 4 pilot models and 250 Army models would be placed, and on March 23rd, the order would be accepted. A division of General Motors, Fisher Body, would be awarded the contract. All vehicles needed to be finished and ready for deployment by August of 1944. The Jumbo would have an additional 1.5 inches of frontal armor welded onto both the upper front plate and side hull, bringing the thickness up to 4 and 3 inches from 2.5 and 1.5 inches respectively. While this is already an impressive difference, the change in turret armor is truly astonishing. The standard M4A3 has a gun shield or mantelet of 3.5 inches thick and a turret armor ranging from 3 to 2 inches. The Jumbo massively increases this protection. The gun shield had a thickness of 7 inches, and the front, sides, and rear of the turret feature 6.1 inches of all-around protection. During tests of the pilot vehicles in June of 1944, the M4A3E2's armor was able to stop various 90mm and 76mm armor-piercing projectiles. However, the armor would not be perfect. The rear of the hull and lower sides of the hull would be left at the original armor thickness of 1.5 inches. Fully loaded, combat-ready, the M4A3E2 weighed 84,000 pounds, or 42 tons. In early June, pilot vehicle 50326 underwent endurance trials, traveling 400 miles. While doing okay for an overweight Sherman, the main problem, as expected, came from the vertical volute spring suspension, or VVSS, that the M4A3E2 had. While the VVSS was good for the standard M4 Sherman, it was less so for the M4A3E2. After the 400-mile endurance testing, the VVSS had essentially bottomed out, with the bogies being pushed to a near horizontal position. The engine would also pose a problem. The M4A3 series of Shermans have the Ford GAA V8 engine. This engine was known for its reliability and performance, pushing the standard M4A3 Sherman to 26 miles an hour on road. The Jumbo would not nearly be as quick. The final drive ratio had to be limited in order to help alleviate stress on the transmission, limiting the top speed of the Jumbo to just 22 miles an hour on road. However, it would likely never consistently reach this top speed. As for the armament of the Jumbo, they'd be fit with a 75mm M3 cannon, the standard cannon found on the vast majority of Shermans. Originally, the 76mm gun was intended to be the primary weapon. However, the 75mm was installed as it was preferred for infantry support. Testing and production of the M4A3E2 would begin in May and end in July. The first Jumbos would reach the New York port in late August of 1944. And after nearly a month, on September 22, 1944, the first 128 Jumbos would arrive in France in the Cherbourg port. By October, all M4A3E2s would be distributed to the 1st, 3rd, and 9th Armies. These up-armored Shermans were immediately put to work. M4A3E2s were commonly used as breakthrough or assault tanks, supporting the infantry when assaulting enemy positions. They were also commonly used to guard convoys, sitting on or near the front of an armored convoy to soak up the hits from enemy weapons. Due to the nature in which they were used, Jumbos took quite heavy casualties. One singular division, the U.S. 4th Armored Division of the U.S. 3rd Army, reported 24 M4A3E2s lost in action by the end of the Second World War. This means that one singular division lost nearly 10% of all jumbos ever produced. While this might seem as if the M4A3E2 performed poorly, that is not the case. Not only did the tankers and infantrymen appreciate the extra armor and assault capabilities, but so did the higher-ups. In the 12th Army Report of Operations, Final After Action Report, we can find several entries that mention the M4A3E2. Quote, on August 29, 1944, the theater informed us that the War Department had released 250 M4A3E2 assault tanks. These tanks were immediately placed in combat and were amazingly successful in operations, taking punishment not possible with a standard M4 tank. Even General Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote a report talking about how successful the M4A3E2 was. Quote, M4A3E2 assault tank has proven itself in combat and has been most favorably received. However, the M4A3E2 was not perfect. While the 75mm M3 cannon was a versatile gun that could support the infantry, assault the enemy, and do some light anti-tank work, it did struggle with more heavily armored vehicles, such as the late-war German Panzers, Panther, Tiger, etc. In the same report where General Eisenhower praised the Jumbo, he also said this, quote, these tanks must be armed with a 76mm gun, end quote. In February of 1944, roughly 100 M4A3E2s, although the exact number is unknown, would be upgunned with a 76mm cannon. These were not factory modifications, but rather field modifications. These up-armored and now upgunned Shermans could have either gotten their 76mm cannons from knocked-out Shermans that had the weapon, or from the regular stock. M4A3E2s would make up less than 1% of all Shermans ever produced. Despite this very limited number, M4A3E2s would play some of the biggest roles in the later stages of World War II. Take Cobra King, for example, the first to break through the German lines around Bastogne and help relieve the 101st Airborne Division. But what about our Jumbo? Excluding the 4 pilot vehicles, all 250 M4A3E2s were sent to the European Theater of Operations, which means ours possibly saw combat. However, documents, especially ones that refer to a Sherman variant that made up less than 1% of all Shermans ever made, are extremely hard to come by. But there is one thing we can infer. Because of our Jumbo serial number, 50570, we know it was produced in July and is possibly one of the last 10 Jumbos ever built. But let's get back to our original question. Does America have a heavy tank in the Second World War? And if not, why is the M4A3E2 called an assault tank but not a heavy tank? To answer that, let's look at the definition of a heavy tank again. Quote, tanks of over 40 tons in weight. Heavy tanks also carry the greatest armament and armor, end quote. If we look at heavy tanks from the Second World War, we can see this definition fits pretty well. Tanks such as the German Tiger I and Tiger II, as well as the Soviet IS series. All of these tanks have impressive armor and armament, all at the cost of mobility. If you want to know why the Pershing isn't regarded as a heavy tank, I recommend watching our video on the M26. But let's put the Jumbo through this definition. The M4A3E2 definitely has the armor of a heavy tank. However, it lacks the greatest armament. And even though nearly half of all the Jumbos would be refit with a 76mm cannon, it doesn't give the Jumbo the firepower that heavy tanks have. But I do think the assault tank role that the M4A3E2 is given is a good fit. This assault tank role pairing a versatile medium tank gun with the armor that competes with some of the heaviest anti-tank guns in the world. The assault tank, or more specifically the Jumbo, blends the best of both of these worlds.